How can you connect to Irish spirituality if you don't have Irish ancestry? Well, Dagdy Ebogus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. It's Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School. And this is a variation on a question that we do get quite often about people's history, their kind of ability to explore spirituality that they're not natively born into or descended from. It's a little bit complex in some ways because Irish pagan practice isn't just open and available for everybody, but in the same way, it's not a closed, restrictive, if you don't have your own tribal lineage and tribal ancestry, you can't access it. So at the Irish Pagan School, we refer to it as semi-closed in a certain way because culturally speaking, Irish people have gone everywhere all over the world. And our ancestry and the mythology and the stories about Ireland all talk about people coming from all over the world to our island, even in modern context, absolutely, but even into our ancient past. The very first stories we have written about Ireland, Leabhar go Bhála Éireann, the book of taking of Ireland, talks about different tribes coming and going from Ireland. They arrive in, they grow, they expand in population. Their descendants go out of Ireland for some reason. Their descendants come back into Ireland for some reason. The story of Ireland has always been emigration and immigration. So understanding that as a cornerstone of the expansive nature of Irish culture and Irish interest really means that we do need to keep the door somewhat open when it comes to people approaching honorably and honestly to explore spirituality from that point of view. So just because you can't genetically trace your DNA down 5 generations to County Mayo or Longford or whomever doesn't mean that you can't approach respectfully Irish culture and learn to grow from what is to be taught here. But in the same way, just because you can chase your lineage all the way down and you know exactly where your great grandparents grew up or went to school or whatever, doesn't mean you're any more special than anyone else. It just means that you may have an easier time of approaching and accessing the origins of your culture or the history and information because you can go to the archives, you can look up where people grew up and where they came from. Other people, though, people who may not have been raised with biological families, may have been adopted, may have been sold by the Catholic Church into families in America, may not have exact information about where they come from, who their biological parents are, and what parish or whomever they were sold out of. So, how do those people and can those people still explore Irish spirituality? Yes, yes, they can. You know, from our point of view, from our culture, from our teaching here, you don't have to be Irish to learn and grow from Irish spirituality. You just need to be able to approach ethically, learn open-heartedly and open-mindedly, and then engage in actual integration and practices that encourage not just yourself, but also the culture that you're gaining from or growing from by learning. And that's the difference between appreciation and appropriation. Appropriation is entitlement and taking from another culture without entering a right relationship or a reciprocal energetic bond with that culture to give back, to direct education and information back towards those root cultures and support those cultures where they are themselves. So I'm crossing into a couple of different lines, but it is very clear. It's important to us to be clear from that standpoint that, you know, you can come. Absolutely. We work really hard to make sure that everyone can come and have a seat at the table. Ancient Irish laws of hospitality said that anyone coming to a household, okay, particularly a privileged household, someone who's a chieftain, a king, or a brewer, had to accept someone else in if they came knocking on the door for at least one night of food and drink and security and safety. Now, you might not find that at every door in Ireland these days, but the culture of hospitality is still there. The culture of caring is still there. I think Ireland still ranks per capita in as one of the most charitable countries in the entire world. So the nature of our cultural expression may have changed, but the cultural root, the expression of that hospitality and care for our fellow people is still there, to my mind. So, a couple of different things. Just because you have genetic lineage or just because you have like archives or information, it doesn't mean you're any more special than anyone else. It just means that you might have a leg up in the list of trying to get the information you're looking for. For those who don't have that information, you need to change the perspective. And this is that kind of how element. Um, you might not know who your great great grandparents were, but that doesn't mean you can't look back to the time frames of previous generations and explore the culture and the history of Ireland, the broader scope. You might not be able to niche it down to a particular parish, a local church, or a local house or anything like that at all, but you can look at the history of the provinces of the country. You can look at what actually happened during the last 200, 300, 400, 500 years, and then explore that to inform your insight and your perspective of Irish culture. Because approaching a spiritual existence or a healthy spiritual existence needs to be done with information, needs to be done with knowledge. As they say, knowledge is power. And what we teach at the school is the knowledge part. We also then give the steps and the guidance towards how a person can begin a practice of experience, through guided meditation, to honoring rituals of solar cycles, lunar cycles, seasonal fire festivals, and then through learning the information, experiencing it with practical application, we begin to get to that integration element where it becomes part of our spiritual growth, it becomes part of our spiritual life, as we live this multifaceted existence. We're not just creatures of intellect, to my mind, or creatures of physical form, or creatures of emotion. There is some spiritual element, which is why we try and acknowledge that facet with what we teach. So, yeah, someone who may not know if they have Irish ancestry in them or not, someone who may not know if, even if they do know they have Irish ancestry, they may not know who, what, where, when, that doesn't need to stop you. That doesn't need to cut you off from exploring and growing and expanding your knowledge. In fact, in ancient Irish custom, in the medieval, actually not even ancient, medieval Ireland, we know that when a chieftain or king declared a gathering known as an Éineach, other chieftains and kings would come, and the first thing that would have to happen was that the chieftains or kings would have their lineage listed out. So for a number of generations, they have to say, I am blah, child of blah, blah of blah, back a couple of generations, and that justified their right to speak at the gathering. But that was a formal structure, that was a formal practice for those in leadership. Other people in the different castes within Irish tribal life didn't have to say who their father, grandfather, great grandfather, grandmother was. They were just a person of that tribe. I'm living down in County Waterford now, and there's Pride of the Dacia. There's a lot of like Dacia was the tribe here before anyone else, before the medieval period eradicated tribal Ireland, but it's still reminded here. It's still recalled. And so only certain people in certain castes or the Sermon Emmet or the top levels of society would have to keep their lineages straight. Everyone else would be like, yeah, I'm a Dacia, or I'm an O'Gonnocht, or I'm an O'Neill. And those tribal names would be enough to identify who we are and where you're from. Even nowadays in Ireland, it's like, oh yeah, sure, where you from? That's not a matter of like, why do you think you're here or who are you to be here? It's, I want to know you. I want to know your people, as in whereabouts are you from. It's almost like, what tribe are you out of, in a way. And so acknowledging that aspect, that cultural aspect for medieval Ireland, meant that children weren't just children of a particular family, they were children of the tribe. They were children of the collective, of the community. We can see this as well in fostering. There was a very, very common practice, even for people in noble castes, to be fostered with other individuals. And in some cases, that was a way of establishing loyalty between various tribes. In that my child, if I was a chieftain in a particular tribe, my children would go and be raised by another like chieftain in another tribe, and I would raise their children as my own children. And so that fostering like built the bridges and bonds and was there to ensure it between those tribal elements. Because at one point during the medieval period, there was like 108 different chieftains or kingships in Ireland. So there has to be some structure around that. And that's where a lot of this comes from. So your connection to Irish spirituality, your connection to Ireland doesn't have to be through the lens of bloodline or through the lens of DNA, because not everyone has that. And also, if we expand it into the spiritual mindset a little bit further, Irish pagan practice acknowledges the transmigration of spirit, in that the energy and entity or spirit that exists within you may have existed in some other body beforehand, may have existed in multiple other bodies beforehand, one of which may have been Irish, may have been born here in Ireland. And so the idea that we need to restrict it down to only those who carry particular DNA traits or particular skin color, hair color, ethnicity, it's bullshit. It really is bullshit. Because that lies very shortly down that road, you end up with racial racism, straight up racism, which is very prevalent. You can see it even in social media today. People are like, oh yeah, like Ireland for the Irish and all. It's just racism. Racism brought about by fear and scarcity because of capitalism and economic pressures, housing crisis, etc. Thanks government. Anyway, but yeah, there's people of varying intergenerational growth here in Ireland whose parents came from other locations around the world, and they're being told, well, you're not Irish, even though their grandparents were born here in Ireland, just because they have a different perceived ethnicity. Again, bullshit. Quite common in our world with the rise of fascism and racism. I'm not going to step into that too far, otherwise we'll end up on a John rant. But being Irish isn't about pale skin, green hair, and red, or green eyes and red hair. There is no Celtic race. There is no genetic lineage that is solely uniquely Irish, because Irish is, to my mind, a culture and an ethnicity in itself. And that's why we teach it as being accessible to anyone who wants to come and learn and grow respectfully, wants to appreciate, not appropriate. Um, so the other thing that we find with people looking at this ancestry lens, and trying to, okay, yeah, I'm gonna shoot it straight. Um, Even people who have Irish ancestry can still be fucking assholes about shit, and that doesn't make them any less special or any more special. And sometimes people think that they can divide themselves from their ancestry in order to claim a higher ground or higher leverage. That is not the way you build a healthy spiritual relationship. If you know your ancestry and you know one of your ancestors was a shitehawk, then you need to get uncomfortable. You need to get comfortable being uncomfortable dealing with that ancestry, because the only way you're going to not pass down ancestral trauma into other generations is by getting uncomfortable where it is now and facing into that. I've had many fantastic and fascinating conversations with people in our community about the idea of ancestry. And there was one individual particularly, and they said, "Listen, I've done my ancestry work. I've checked it all out, and it turns out that they themselves are descended from both the colonizer and the colonized of where they live right now. If that's not going to cause ancestral trauma, I'm not sure what will." But the bravery of that individual to set into that, like, not try and ignore it, not try and gloss it over into love and light, and we're all going to get on. They did the hard work. They went and explored both sides of that as a descendant of the oppressor and of the oppressed, to try and find a middle ground of comfort for themselves so that they're able to live a healthy spiritual path now and not pass down any spiritual trauma or any kind of trauma, emotional trauma from their life into their children's lives. So it is about doing the work. Time and again, it's about doing the work. And for people who do not have a direct connection, be it ancestry or anything like that at all, the how to answer that question for yourself is to approach Ireland from a zoomed out perspective. You don't need to know who your great 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 grandfather was and what port of Ireland they sailed out of on what particular ship. But you can look at, well, what was the history of emigration like in the 1980s when I was growing up? A whole load of people going off to America, going off to Canada, going off to Australia. Roll it back, into the 1850s. There we go, post-famine Ireland. And again, it wasn't an accidental famine. I'll do another video. I think I've done videos on Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger. Yeah, it was a genocide. It was a structural genocide done against the Irish, where over 1 million people died because of a blight, which hit Ireland so badly because all of the crops that were growing here in Ireland were owned by foreign landlords, and there was no care or compassion for the people of the island. And so people survived that, but they left, they got out. And so their children became the diaspora all over the world. And so you might not know specifically your own place within that story, but that doesn't mean you can't explore the story. That doesn't mean you can't look at the whole kind of perspective of time and history and learn from that. And then through the lens of that information, approach Ireland from that broader, informed point of view, approach the idea of the culture, the spirituality through that lens, and you will still find a connection to spiritual practices, to Irish deities, or even if it's not down to specific deities, you may still have a greater appreciation for Ireland and those who come from here and choose to come here, because there are still loads of people coming to Ireland, and here I am, a couple of generations on myself from my ancestors being here in Ireland or coming back into Ireland. So, how can a person approach their spirituality, Irish spirituality, if they don't have Irish lineage? Quite easily. Learn the history, put the effort in, get to know the culture, immerse yourself in Irish language, Irish media, and through there, explore honest and reliable sources, which, we've a list of at the Irish Pagan School. And when you're safe to do so, explore the not so great resources, because that's still part of learning the multiple perspectives of Irish culture. And stay curious. Follow your curiosity and do the work, put the time in, read what you can read, listen to what you can listen, watch the movies, listen to the podcasts. Blind Boy is an absolutely great podcast to listen to. I would hugely recommend. If you're looking for an amazing satirical work that undermined the power of the Catholic Church in Ireland, Father Ted. Can't not recommend that. Finn Dwyer from the Irish History Podcast, absolutely amazing. Mother Folklore, which is, Mother Folklore is the language. So Mother Folklore is another podcast where they talk about Irish language as well and Irish language words, where it comes from, but not just in a dry linguistic sense. They also talk about the folklore and the stories about Irish language too, which is really, really fascinating and interesting. But there are so many ways to explore Irish media, historical and current, that will let you lead you along an understanding towards a connection with Ireland, Irish culture, and Irish ethnicity, wherever you may be and whomever you may be. So hopefully this has been interest to you. As ever, I'm coming back to saying the work. You got to do the work. You got to put the time in. But there's a joy in that. There really, really is, getting to know that and how that can be very fulfilling when you find a deeper connection for yourself. And if Ireland, Irish spirituality is not for you, absolutely. But the only way you'll know that is by trying and getting to know as much as you can. So, yeah, hopefully this has been interesting. Thank you very much for stopping by. I will recommend those free resources that we always do, irishpagan.school/free. This is a list of recommended good resources about Irish culture, Irish spirituality, and ethnicity. And it's a great way to start and to kick off if you are going to follow on and pursue this for yourself. Until next time, look after yourself, take care, agus slán. Goodbye.